meeting back in terms of being the facilitator. Thank you, Dawn and Kyla, for holding down the fort while I was out. You guys did awesome work, and so did everyone on the group from what I can see from all the content I'm reviewing. So just as a reminder, we're sort of in the last phase of this content development that we're working with our working groups on. And today we're in the last meeting of the summer where we'll be talking about the final pieces of our equitable implementation and accountability framework. Got it. Okay, so you have the link to the slides in your email and meeting invite if you'd like to open them up. I'm going to share my screen. And thank you, David, for putting those into the chat. Okay, can someone just confirm that you're seeing the slides?
Looks good.
Thank you. All right, so like I said, today we're going to be talking about the final piece of our framework that we've been working on over the last few meetings. We're going to be talking about indicators and accountability, and we'll get into more detail on both of those in a few minutes. For the agenda today, we're going to do our usual thing, settling in, talking about our ground rules. We will have a little bit of presentation, but mostly want to hear from you today. We'll have 2 activities, and I think with the size of the group, at least from what I'm seeing, we will break out into 2 breakout rooms to ensure that everyone gets a chance to contribute to the discussion. And then we will have a quick wrap up and talk about next steps. So our objectives for today are to talk about how to measure progress of RVAgreen 2050 once it is a thing, a plan, for lack of a better word, using a set of indicators. And then we will also talk about accountability for the plan. So we're talking about, once we get into implementation, how do we make sure that we are making progress on the strategies and objectives and goals that we set along the way, and also holding ourselves and everyone involved accountable for that progress and equitable implementation. Just to quickly run through our ground rules. You all know these by heart, hopefully. Let's make sure to use these today and have a great last meeting of the summer. So you've seen this timeline graphic plenty of times. Just as an orientation, we are in this final piece of the plan development phase. We are creating our implementation framework. We're going to be talking about indicators. So it says metrics here, but I think indicators is the word that we have landed on for measuring progress. And then just in a little bit more detail, so that everyone knows sort of what's coming up after this. We are wrapping up sort of our work with you over the summer on the pieces of the strategies, the implementation framework, and then over the next several months through until the spring of next year, we're going to be actually drafting the plan. So putting it all together, bringing together all of the amazing content and different pieces that have been created with you and the rest of our partners over the last almost year now or more, really. And then we're going to be coming back to you all later in the fall to present what we've done so far. So you will be hearing from us. And then we will be taking out a draft plan to the community in the spring with the goal of finalizing and then seeking approval and adoption later in the summer and early fall. So this is where we are today in terms of the RVAgreen 2050 structure. We've been talking about the strategies over the summer. Y'all have talked about and worked on impacts and outcomes. And then today we're going to be talking about these last 2 pieces. So the indicators for measuring success, and then also talking about another piece of implementation, which is the accountability. And then just real quick, you've also seen this graphic before, but just to show kind of where we've been and where we're going. We started out the summer, I believe, with talking about the impacts of the strategies, what we hope to see because of the implementation of those. So developed those impact maps with outputs and outcomes. Last meeting, you guys worked on the sort of second part of the equitable implementation, looking at each of the strategies and its subcomponents and thinking about what the equitable next steps would be, who the potential implementation partners are, and potential funding sources, and all of those sorts of details. And then at today's meeting, we're going to sort of go a little bit higher level. So instead of thinking at the very specific strategy level, we're going to be thinking about, with all of the strategies that we've been working on over the last several months, at the higher level, how can we make sure that we are making progress towards the outcomes that we heard from you in the community that we want to see from this plan? And how can we make sure that those who need to be held accountable for that progress are being held accountable? So, just as a reminder, here is the Equitable Implementation and Accountability Framework. We're going to divide the meeting today into two parts. So, with this first part, we're going to be talking about indicators. And the question here that we're asking is, with the plan itself, sort of big picture, how do we make sure that we are making progress and getting to the outcomes that we heard you all in the community want to see from RVAgreen 2050? So we've built this a graphic to show how different pieces of this indicators aspect of the framework will fit together. So we're going to start with an outcome, and these are aspects of the future Richmond that the community wants to see. So we gathered these outcomes, and I'll list them in a few minutes. We have a set of 12 outcomes across the entire RVAgreen 2050 plan. So not just our environment strategies, but across all of the strategies and the 5 pathways. And these are outcomes that we heard, again, from you all, from all of the community feedback that we've been getting since the beginning of the RVAgreen 2050 process. And for each of those outcomes, we will have at least one indicator. And this is a data point that will help to demonstrate progress towards that outcome. And I'll give an example that will help to illustrate what I'm talking about here. In addition, we want to make sure that we are, as always, centering equity in this process and in the plan itself. So in addition to having a maybe more traditional or an indicator that we might see already being collected in terms of the data, we want to add that we will have at least one, what we're calling for now, an equity indicator. So these are things that will help to demonstrate that not only are we making progress towards this outcome in a way that, reduces greenhouse gas emissions and helps to make our community more resilient, but we're doing that in a way that will help to achieve an equitable outcome as well. So again, the outcomes are across the entire plan, and each of the outcomes is supported by multiple pathways and objectives, and underneath of those objectives, of course, are all of our strategies. So just to show an example here, one of the outcomes that, again, we heard from the community is that RVAgreen 2050 will contribute to a future Richmond where there are cleaner and more efficient buildings. One of the indicators that we can use to track progress towards that outcome is total citywide building energy use. So again, in a more traditional sense, we know that if citywide building energy use is going down, then that means we are making progress towards having cleaner and more efficient buildings. On the equity indicator side, we identified that a potential indicator here is the percentage of households with a high energy burden. And just because this isn't the buildings and energy group, I'll clarify that energy burden is the percentage that of a household's income that goes towards utility bills. And so if you have high energy burden, you're paying disproportionately high energy bills compared to your income. And so even as we are reducing citywide building energy use, we also want to see that at the individual or household level, that people are using less energy and also living in more efficient buildings, which will therefore reduce households with high energy burden while still meeting that outcome of Richmond having cleaner and more efficient buildings. And then over on the side here, I just pointed out that obviously the strategies or the pathway of buildings and energy and the objectives and strategies within that pathway will support this outcome. So, here are the 12 outcomes that we have come up with based on, again, your feedback and feedback from the entire community. We'll be diving into some of these in more detail, and y'all have these slides so you can come back and look at these. But we wanted to keep this list manageable in terms of the number of outcomes that we're looking at, and also make sure that these were cross-cutting across the entire RVAgreen 2050 plan. And just to show that that's the case, Dawn actually put together this awesome chart. I don't put this up so that y'all can try to read this. I just want to show that for each of our 12 outcomes, which are across the top of the chart here, you can see that where the red X's indicate that an objective or a strategy within that pathway contributes to that outcome. And so many of these outcomes are related to and are supported by objectives and strategies across the entire plan. So, of course, we're going to be concentrating on the ones that relate most, that are most relevant to the environment pathway. But we just want to show that one of the reasons that we have this really concise list of outcomes, which I'll go back to so you can see it, is because these are things that will be achieved by implementing the entire plan as a whole. So I am going to get us into our first activity, and I'll pause for questions in a second. What we're going to be doing is looking at these outcomes that I've highlighted in green here that I thought were most relevant to this group because of our collective, expertise and the different strategies and objectives we've been working on. You are welcome to give us feedback on any of these outcomes. You can always, email us, put notes into the slides that we'll show you in a second. But just for the sake of time and relevance, we're going to be concentrating on these 6 that are in green. So before I go to explain what we're going to be doing in our first activity, does anyone have any questions or thoughts on the information I just shared? Or does anyone from the team have anything to add? I can't see anyone's faces, so just chime in or put something in the chat, and I think someone will be able to read it.
This is Monica.
Hey, Monica.
Hi. Good afternoon to all. Thank you so much for the presentation, Brianne. I just wanted to clarify what I heard about is it called an equity index? What we calling that?
The Climate Equity Index, the mapping tool, or something different?
No, what you just presented in terms of the outcomes and then equity measurement. I didn't understand.
Oh, equity indicators.
Okay, equity indicator. Yes. So my question was, in the first, and I know that this is an example that you said, but am I understanding it correctly that the outcome had to do with more efficient city buildings, right?
Buildings all across the city, so not just government buildings, but citywide.
Okay, citywide. And then the equity indicator was based on resident burden?
Energy burden, yes. So with the idea here is that if we achieve the outcome of, in general, having cleaner and more efficient buildings citywide, that I'm kind of saying it in reverse here, but that would mean if we are doing that in an equitable way, that people have reduced energy burden. They're paying proportionately less for their energy bills as compared to their total household income.
Okay, thank you. So my comments would be that in an example such as that perhaps the burden wouldn't be on the residents, but would be on the I don't know, but not on the residents themselves. That I think the shift should be that there is an overall reduction of in its energy usage,
Mhm.
energy cost, but that it be listed as residential, I think, is deflecting. That's just an observation and it's just an example, but it's just a, like I said, an observation, a thought that came to me that we have to be very careful about shifting the burden to people who don't cause pollution
Mhm.
necessarily. Um, I mean, all residents do, but like you said, where the largest polluters are, I think we should focus efforts, is my
Mhm.
comment, especially related to equity indicators. Thank
Brianne,
you for allowing me to
oh,
comment.
Sure. Thanks, Monica. I heard someone else too.
it's Dawn. Would you
Hey,
like me
Don.
to respond to that?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Because it's a buildings and energy strategy about, so one example of a strategy that would fall under this is weatherization. And when we talked about the equitable next steps of residential energy efficiency, we talked about how can we roll that out in a very equitable way. And so if it's done right and resources get allocated to the communities in need, frontline communities, those that have that are prioritized through our equity lens, then that's going to lower their energy costs because they'll have more efficient homes, and so then the proportion that they're paying toward the utility bills will not be as high, and that's what the energy burden definition is. So, Monica, it's a great point that the language is really important in here because you're seeing, equity and burden in the same in the same sentence, and we just need to. You're right. Be careful about that. But this is an example of a strategy that would definitely help, low income residential communities.
Thanks, Don. And Monica, hopefully that helps. Thank you for your comment. I think that's definitely helpful for me. Want to make sure that addresses any additional information we can provide, and then also check with the group to see if there are any other questions or comments.
I have a separate question if we can diverge. This is Jen.
Yeah, go for it.
On slide 20, I'm just curious. So I don't want to add more work. I'm happy with our 6 focus areas. Who's focusing on climate ready communities? I guess I thought they'd be related to heat and flood resilience.
Yes, so that one will be looked at by the community working group. They have, they meet on Friday, and anyone is welcome to attend any other working group meetings. I'll just say that too. The climate ready community outcome is more related to the social resilience aspect. And so in terms of that, we're talking about, communities' access to resources, like resilience hubs, for example. And the community pathway is where we have our objectives and related strategies related to community resilience in terms of, again, like access to resources, community cohesion, knowledge, uh, integrating climate resilience into existing city plans and structures and things like that. But if you want, you save any extra time to look at any of these other ones today too.
I will not be responsible for signing up us for additional duties, but I appreciate the explanation.
Yeah. And what we could do if other folks are interested, we can share the full list of these with the indicators so that folks can see what's being proposed and the different comments we're getting from the working groups. And that way, if you happen to be interested in another topic that we don't get to today, you can always send us your comments separately. Thanks, Jen. Any other questions or comments before we head into our activity? No. Okay, cool. So, we are going to spend the next 30 minutes or so talking about those outcomes and specifically the indicators that we've drafted based on the outcomes and impact mapping y'all did probably two or three meetings ago, as well as best practices research, what other cities are doing to measure progress. and a bunch of other sources. We want your valuable feedback on these topics as we look at the proposed indicators. So what we're going to be asking you is for each of the outcomes, again, we're going to be looking at 6. We're going to break up into 2 breakout rooms, but everyone will be looking at all 6 of the indicators. So we're not going to be doing any switching or anything. So for each outcome, there's a set of proposed indicators, both sort of traditional or whatever you want to call them, as well as equity indicators. So we want to know, are these the right indicators to help us determine if we are making progress towards the outcome? Where can we find the data to measure these indicators? For most of them, I think as we were going through them internally, we were able to identify that at least the data exists, but that might not be the case for all of them. And if you have ideas or sources, please let us know. And then on the indicator side, which of them could be disaggregated by factors such as race, income, and others to help us measure the equitable impact of the progress being made. So, for example, back to the example that I showed earlier, which I should have put this in here, but if we were going to disaggregate the data associated with this proposed equity indicator, we would want to be looking at not only the total, the cumulative percentage of households in Richmond that face a high energy burden, but we would want to disaggregate that by factors such as race. So out of all of the, what's the percentage of white households versus Black and African American households, for example, facing high energy burden? Because we do know from research that households of color tend to face more inequitable outcomes. And so we want to make sure that if that data is available, we're capturing that as we measure our progress. So I'll go back to our discussion slides here. You have these for reference, and then we'll also, me and Kyla will be working with you to go through these questions for each of the outcomes. Before we break up into our groups, I just want to show sort of what we'll be working with here. And Kyla, just as an FYI, I'm going to make some copies of these. So if you want to use slides 23 and 24 for your group, I'll make a copy for us to work on in the other breakout room. But as you can see, these are the first 3 of the 6 indicators to talk about. And you can see that we have proposed or draft indicators as well as equity indicators here. And Kyla and I, again, will just be taking notes on your thoughts on all of this. So feel free to speak up in the discussion. You can also use the slide notes if you want to, put in links or anything like that to help us as we collect feedback. So I think that's it. Kyla, if you want to let me know when the breakout rooms are ready, I'm going to stop sharing. I did that successfully. Any questions about our activity before we go into our groups? No? Okay, so it is about 1:25 now. So we will keep time and wrap up this activity by 1:55, and then you can take a 5-minute break and come back at 2. So if you finish early, just come back at 2 p.m. and we will transition to the next topic for today's meeting. So Kyla, whenever you're ready, feel free to send, I guess, my group into our room.
Yeah, I'm ready. It'll take a couple seconds, but I did put a time slot for the groups as well, so it'll automatically end in 30 minutes.
Oh, perfect. Okay, thanks, Kyla.
Mm-hmm. Hi, everybody. How's it going this beautiful Monday afternoon?
Good.
I wish I sounded better, but I did not get very good sleep last night, so please forgive my monotone voice and everything. We are on slide 23 and 24 for this. I just want to open this space for like just open dialogue, and I'll be taking notes along the way. If you all need a reminder of the questions that we're asking ourselves today, or number one is, are these the right indicators and equity indicators for this outcome? Two, where can we find the data for these indicators? And if it doesn't exist, how can we get them? And the last question is, which indicators can be disaggregated into race, income, and other factors? So as you all are thinking, I will be jotting some things down. David, feel free to jot things down as well. But the discussion can start now. We can start with the more green space and trees. And if we want, we can start with the regular indicators, which is the percentage tree canopy cover overall, and the percentage people within a 10-minute walk from the park.
So one question I had, I guess, is the percentage tree canopy cover. So that's going to be, what, satellite derived, or how to, rather than like doing like a tree count or something like that as a goal, like increase number of trees or something like that. We're using this kind of satellite to measure, which is fine. I just want to understand that's what.
Well, I don't know that it's actually set in stone as to which way they would be utilizing it, whether it's the satellites or planting trees. I'm assuming that satellites is probably going to be the easier way to collect that data, and looking at the change over time with satellite data.
Because then maybe it's less of a concern. But what I was going to say is that it's not just trees, maybe, that we're thinking about with green spaces, right? It is trees, but it's also shrubs and plants and just things that are green that aren't pavements and so forth. And so if we're, if you're not going and counting individual trees, then I guess you'll capture that as part of your percent canopy cover. If you're looking at just percent green stuff rather than.
I guess another way to frame that would be, and this would be a question for you all, like percent decrease in impervious surface cover instead of percent increase in tree canopy. I don't know if they're exactly equivalent or if one's maybe better than the other, but Todd, to your point, that may be a better way to encapsulate the sort of totality of trees and shrubs and everything.
I guess I'd be curious if the satellite data picks up lawn in that case, because if it does or doesn't, that's maybe more space for trees than just like a reduction in impervious surface.
Yeah, so I've actually worked with satellite data, looking at change over time with within an area, and it does when running the actual analysis, it will pick up different colors for different types of tree cover. And what you do is kind of like you compare it to maybe something on Google Maps to their actual what is it? I'm having a brain fart because I'm just tired. But you'll compare it to the various little cells within GIS, and then that's how you like make the determination of like, or classification of which colors are represented by which thing.
So it sounds like we have some ability to filter out things we didn't, or types of vegetation that we were trying not to include.
Yes, if you want to do that, you can definitely do that.
Yeah, well, I think about the lawn in that case because I've heard some of the comments we've had in this process so far about how we feel about turf.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. So, you know, it's so I guess that's not, David, that's not just everything other than impervious surfaces. There's other things. But it seems like there is, yeah, that maybe needs to just be refined a little bit. Like what we mean exactly by percent tree canopy cover. Yeah, that would be great. I like what you're putting in there now.
We may have to go back because I think this is the correct acronym for the analysis, but it might be wrong. With me today, you just never know.
Probably no S, maybe just NDVI.
Maybe. Does that look familiar to you, Todd?
Yeah, there's definitely an NDVI index.
Okay, that's probably what it is.
Yeah. And that's just vegetation, though. But that's just greenness, right? That's just looking at that NDVI stands for normalized difference. It's a vegetation index. So that's just any kinds of how much greener a place is getting. Basically.
Yeah, but I think within that you can still separate the actual trees from shrubbery from lawns, if I'm not mistaken. Do we want to, I guess, look at the equity indicator for that, or do we want to look at the regular indicator for the 10-minute walk?
So with the 10-minute walk, with any of our other pieces of information, do we reference what that park is supposed to look like, the quality of the park, acreage, or if it's sports field versus tree canopy, that sort of thing? And then, of course, the larger area that a park takes up versus just a pocket park or a parkette, especially when it comes to our equity indicator. If we just have small dotted, non-connected green spaces, they're not as impactful as more of a connected green space, and that can really range in the different parts of our city, especially with the red-lined areas.
So also with the 10-minute walk, I don't know if this is us or like the transportation group, but just like the quality and safety of that walk, like how people actually get there.
Good point. Yeah, what's the speed limits? And hopefully they went into a little bit more detail with that versus bike lanes versus sidewalk. What's the how is the sidewalk? Is it 60-year-old with cracks all in it? But yeah, we can go into a lot of detail about that too.
So if we were using this to measure sort of success, 2 years from now, am I hearing that you all would want maybe a better definition of park to like be a certain size or a certain, like have a clearer definition for that, so that we're not measuring like a clump of trees on the street as a park,
Yeah, we could almost have the quality rating of a park, and depending on the type of amenities and sizes that it provides in there.
Does Parks and Rec have a way to measure that now? Like, I guess I'm thinking about future Southside parks. And if somebody said that they wanted like a basketball complex, are we saying that's not as great because there's not tree canopy?
I think a little bit of that goes into it. We're kind of doing it with some of our master planning right now with community input, and we'll give Westover as an example of trying to maintain some of the tennis courts and basketball courts, playground, but also trying to, and sports fields, while also trying to add like a path and trees And I don't know if we have the right formula for that. And I think that's kind of what we're trying to figure out. And this is going to be, it will be a good practice for that. But yeah, I think from this Parks and Rec side of thing, yeah, how do we rate? And we're trying to just say it by community input, but maybe we can give them a little bit better data as to certain amenities that's beneficial for their health. It's turning in my mind right now, but it's kind of the first time I'm thinking of it with this kind of lens.
That makes sense. Can I ask if community input is for the users of that park, or like other people judging other parks?
Yeah, that's a challenge too. Especially with Westover, you had a lot of people from Chesterfield County like coming in and voicing their opinion. So we really want to try to get as many indicators of the people who live closest, mostly in that 10-minute walkability. But of course, we want to attract other people to the area too.
And I would propose, thank you, and I would propose that that's also included as an indicator, that the people who use the spaces contribute to creating or planning for spaces.
Mm-hmm.
Bryce, it seems like it's a balancing act, right? Like, because once you start asking for just like what you would like most, it just have to be like you could get like movie theaters, right? Or like bowling alleys, or like basketball court is probably the biggest use. And how does that square with the goals of of the green space? I guess you can tease that out. Like there's different kinds of benefits from green space than there are from a basketball court or a movie theater or stuff like that, and you just have to.
Yeah, and that's kind of where like what tool are we going to use to quantify it, and I don't have that yet, so we'll have to kind of look at it with that in mind. But yeah, it's been a big push mostly from the community side in prioritizing it that way based on votes, surveys, that sort of thing. But yeah, do we want a trampoline park in the middle of something if it's not really that great for the health? I don't know. But yeah, those are all good examples, but trying to balance all of those things out for sure.
All right. Did we have any equity considerations or additional equity considerations when it comes to the tree canopy cover?
I was thinking it should be disaggregated across, well, spatially across like council districts at least, and then look at maybe census tracts and see if there's like a correlation before and after with race or income. So maybe you can make that correlation disappear eventually.
Right. Thank you. All right. If there are no additional considerations for this particular item, we can move on to increase heat resilience. Are you all okay with moving forward? Okay, perfect. First, we have the average temperature across the city, and then the temperature difference between the hottest and the coolest areas within the city. Our equity considerations are the number of heat-related illnesses, fatalities, and calls for service, and the neighborhood level average temperatures are our equity indicators.
I think
we do industry.
Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. I was just asking if we could add industry monitoring of industry heat output. as an indicator.
All right.
I have some concerns with average temperature across the city, just because our global temperatures are going up. So I just think overall, even as we try to mitigate it as much as possible, are we not just going to see the average temperature increase across the city regardless of what we do in our immediate area?
Yeah.
That's right. Number 2 does make sense. Temperature difference between hottest and coolest areas of the city, because we'll be able to compare the two, even though overall it still may be increasing. But yeah, number 1 is just going to be tough for us to measure as an indicator that we're doing better.
Right.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think it's important to track though, right? like how that's going. I'm not sure the average
Of course,
temperature
yes.
is the. I'm also not sure the average temperature is the best measure of that, whether it's or if it's like number of days above 90 degrees or number of heat waves or some other measure that's more correlative to summer temperatures and which is what we're really concerned about, and that are related to kind of health impacts. Bryce's point is a really good one. That's going to be any of those measures will be hard to have success in reducing.
Yeah.
It sounds like the second one we're okay with. Are there any additions or considerations that we should have prior to moving forward? And I'm just looking at the time. I realized we only have 10 minutes left in this for this discussion. So I'm going to go ahead, if you all are okay with it. Any considerations for the equity indicators here?
I think the first one should have some mapping with census tracts or neighborhoods as well for the number of heat-related illnesses, fatalities, and calls for service.
Neighborhoods and
or census tracts, which whatever is going to end up being consistent with every other equity indicator.
All right. If there are no additional, thank you, David.
Yeah.
If there are no additional things, we can move on to flood resilience, increased flood resilience. We have percent permeable surfaces and capacity of storm management system. And then our equity indicator is the number of standing water and flooding complaints and calls for service emergency resulting from heavy precipitation and or extreme storm events.
One thing, maybe the cost of recovery during flood events. If we're starting to build more resilient systems, hopefully that will decrease the cost of recovery. And I'm thinking of from the James River Park side. Anytime we get above 16 feet, we have washout of our trails, so there's a recovery cost to it. And I'm sure that can go to other areas of the city. With roadway maintenance or culvert maintenance or something along those lines. And so that could be an indicator if our cost of recovery after certain flood events decreases or increases too. But
right. Are there any other points of feedback for this one?
I've got a few, but I didn't want to monopolize it. For the permeable surfaces, I'd be curious if we're talking about man-made permeable surfaces or like anything that can absorb water, because that'll either combine indicators from more green space and trees, or we're just going to like measure some alleys and parking strips and green roofs. So that's a question there. I'm happy with 2, but I do think that somewhere in here we need to think about the difference between upstream flooding that requires the flood wall and is never going to impact the city, and localized flooding when it's pouring in Richmond. So that's kind of hard because, like, to Bryce's point, if Ann Carroll's Landing has flooded substantially because of river flooding, it just is kind of all, it's maybe we need to separate out which kind of flooding we're talking about for some of these, and sometimes it'll be both. Food for thought.
Jennifer, this is my ignorance, but is flash flooding a way of like, can you differentiate between like those using flash flooding as a measure? I don't even know how that works. Jennifer.
I think she's frozen.
Me?
Yeah.
I'm good. I just was done. Was there another question?
Yeah, is flash flooding
missed
like a way? Can you differentiate that between like river flooding and like flash flooding? That's like, I don't know. Is that maybe I'm being
Yeah,
ignorant?
I
Okay.
think that would be sufficient because, like, when I'm thinking localized, I'm thinking about a storm cell over Richmond, something that would trigger a combined sewer event in today's world, versus most of the time, river flooding is going to be huge snow upstream or a tropical storm or hurricane that goes towards Lynchburg and doesn't sit on top of Richmond.
Should we just be in general tracking CSO events? Is that, I mean, that would be an easy one to track.
I don't know if that is quite flood resilience versus, like, yes, if there's a CSO event, most likely some place is flooding, but it could literally be that it's rained in Henrico, Gillies is flooding, and nobody feels a thing because we channelized that canal.
Yeah.
So I don't think that one is quite the same as what increased flood resilience is going to be, or we're going to be like, yeah, it went down because we got a 14-year plan to end them. So we could do that and we'll seem great by the end of the process.
We'll be really successful if we do all that then.
Yeah, we'll meet one.
I think we could put it as an option.
I have a point to back to heat resilience, if we could get to it before we close out, but I don't want to stall any more flood resilience conversation.
Well, we had 3 other things to jot down, but do you have access to the slides?
Mm-hmm.
Feel free to in the notes section, feel free to jot down your thoughts on the heat resilience. Are you okay with that?
Sure.
All right, so I'm going to try to push us on to the next one, which is engaged and involved communities. Our indicator is the total participation in climate action and resilience initiatives to be defined, compare city-based and community-based initiatives participation. And equity indicators are the demographics of participation. Goal is to match citywide demographics. And so in that, we're going to be comparing citywide or city-based and community-based initiative participation. And then there's the usage of the equity screening tool and climate equity index as equity indicators as well. Are there any things that you all would like to add to this one?
I'm sorry, we're an engaged and involved community now?
Yes. So we had 7 seconds of suspense. So I'm going to go ahead and move on. I personally have some questions here, but I guess I'll present those elsewhere. So we have improved air quality as our next outcome. And for all those, feel free to jot your thoughts down if you have questions or considerations. We have the days per year with poor air quality, and then neighborhood level air quality is our equity consideration. Is there anything we would like to add here?
I think the equity indicator is a better measurement in this instance. And I appreciate it being there. And I think, yeah, that routine monitoring, whether it's centralized with the city or kind of like we did a month or so ago with people going out and measuring the air quality and temperatures. Excuse me.
Do you think that it'd be important to, I guess, identify how frequent that routine monitoring happens?
And do other places do this? Do they have air quality monitors spaced throughout cities and neighborhoods to just get like real-time data? Is that something?
They're not, the networks aren't usually pretty sparse, right? They're not super dense, but technology is coming online to put, to get a bunch out there. I think that's going to be more realistic than like to get some, then have a whole bunch of, then I don't know, maybe every 4 years you do another campaign like happened this summer, right? But
yeah, you're
would have permanent indicator things out there. Yeah, I agree. This is really important at the equity level. The equity indicator for this is going to be super important because most of those monitoring stations aren't where they need to be right now.
Kind of like the heat issue, I'm curious how we avoid, like, if there's wildfires elsewhere and we get stuck with crummy air quality, like how we're really measuring our progress if it's just more like the end is near. Or if you can like sub out events, or that we can, I don't mean like ignore them, but just how do you say if we've made progress normally? And
I'm just thinking through, I'm loving the connection though. I'm just thinking about it, it's like thinking of how I can use that in class. And it's like, well, it shows our impact, to the wildfires going on in the West. Like if we're really making a difference here in Richmond, we're going to reduce the number of wildfires, which actually has an impact on our air quality, right? If we're actually globally we are contributing to bring down the global temperature. But yeah.
Well, remember a few years ago, the Great Dismal Swamp was on fire, and I think it was summertime, and it was so smoky in Richmond. So, I mean, it can be more local.
well, then we really got our work cut out for us.
So I'm going to try to knock out this last one before, your 4-minute break is up. Increase support for climate action and resilience, the percentage of RVAgreen 2050 strategies with funding from any source, city budget, private, etc. And then our equity indicators and amount of money available for neighborhood-based climate action and resilience projects.
All right. Hey, everybody. I know we just got bounced back to the big room. Kyla, I want to check in with your group. Did y'all finish, or are you still finishing up the last one?
The last one.
Awesome. So we're just moving there. So let's do that one as a group if everybody's okay with that. And Kyla, if you don't mind taking notes. So let me share my screen and I'll just look at Kyla, the one that your group was working on here. And I told this to our small group, but you all will have access to these slides as always. And you can also reach out to me if you want to have like a one-on-one and really do a deep dive on any of this. But let's just wrap up and then take a quick break. So the last indicator in this set, the set that we're looking at here, is to see increased support for climate action and resilience. And really by support, we mean, capacity in terms of, staff, volunteers, time, as well as budget. And that can come from any source. So the main indicator or sort of traditional indicator we're proposing here is to track the number of our strategies that are funded. And this can be, again, from any source. And then a proposed equity indicator is to track the amount in terms of dollars available for neighborhood-based climate action and resilience projects. And this is one of those that isn't currently tracked right now, so we'd have to figure out, how to actually do this. But what I had in mind here is like, what percentage or what dollar amount of, the RVAgreen 2050 budget is actually going towards neighborhood-based projects. Are there foundations like the Community Foundation that have money available for neighborhood-based resilience and climate and environmental projects, things like that? So let's just take maybe 5 more minutes and get everyone's thoughts on this outcome and those proposed indicators.
Would you amend that to say, as an equity indicator, dollars available and allocated for neighborhood climate action projects?
Yeah, good idea.
If support is also that volunteer power that you were talking about, I think that would be interesting as an equity indicator, or like the number of people involved by neighborhood or census tract.
Involved in like these projects.
Yeah, like involved, like helping or engaging with.
Any other thoughts on this one? All right, hearing none. I know that was kind of quick, so let us know if you want to come back to any of this, but we do want to keep moving because we have another topic to get to. So it is 2 o'clock. Take a quick break and come back at 2:05, and we will talk about accountability. Thanks, guys. Dawn, any feedback I should take in for the second part? Or any thoughts you have?
No. I think it's great discussion.
I wish we had more time, but I want to make sure we get to the other piece. So
Yeah.
Are you still seeing my screen? Yes, you are.
I am.
Okay, let's stop that for now.
I think what's interesting is that, a lot of these ideas are, we got to make sure that we're not focused on the strategy level metrics. These really are things that are going to make sense across all pathways.
Yeah, I think that's going to be something probably we're just going to have to keep in mind, like for the rest of the process. Is like, we've probably already talked about anything that will come up unless it's like a really novel idea, I'm guessing.
Yeah, like I went back and looked at, why is green space, when they're talking about distance to parks and stuff, why is it being counted under waste composting? Well, when I went back to the impact map, it's because they thought if there's more residential composting, then there would be more community gardens or,
Mm.
and so that can't, measuring distance to parks isn't going to include that. So,
Mm. Yeah. What
so
is
it's really
that?
just percentage of green canopy or something.
But if there were more, so sorry, you said essentially more composting means like we need more places to use it, and that could be like more community gardens or something.
And
which
more homeowners would.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, that
gardens.
would only capture the community
Parks.
gardens that are official city parks essentially. But you were in there and talking about like what do we call, I think there's questions in there. What do we call a park? Obviously. What's the 10-minute walk? That has to be defined. So yeah, that's interesting though. I think that's systems map or I think I'm just getting more ideas for how the thing that Josh and his team will help us build could really help to like illustrate these connections.
Great.
Hopefully they're like just little geniuses. Because I can't.
Oh yeah, they are. Well, good. I'm glad you're getting tidbits of visuals together.
All right, 2:05. I'm going to give another minute because it feels like that was quick. Okay, so hopefully folks are coming back now. We have a couple minutes before we get into our activity, so that'll allow people to continue to come back. I'm going to go ahead and get started. Okay. All right, so part 2 of our meeting, we're thinking still about higher level overall implementation and measuring progress for RVAgreen 2050 as a plan, again, at the higher level, sorry. With our equitable implementation and accountability framework, we now want to turn to the last piece that we will be working with you all on, which is accountability and transparency. So this is, not just making sure that we are collecting the data necessary to track progress towards those outcomes that we just looked at, but how do we make sure that at all levels of the plan, those who need to be held accountable are being held accountable, and how do we do that? What's the structure for that accountability and transparency in terms of reporting, who's involved, all of those sorts of questions. So we're going to go straight into our activity because I don't have really any additional information to present here, and we want to get all of your ideas. And we will give you some prompts to think about, though. So the 2 main questions we're going to be talking about for the next probably half an hour are, what does accountability look like for RVAgreen 2050 to you? So what does accountability mean to you? We know that it can mean different things to different people. And then the second question will be, how would you ensure that equity is being centered in implementation of the strategies? And we'll get into those over the next few minutes before we separate into groups. So for that first part, and again, we can always help as facilitators to prompt you guys with these discussion questions. But when it comes to accountability for RVAgreen 2050 as a whole, we want you to tell us what you think in terms of who needs to be held accountable. So Office of Sustainability, the entire city of Richmond, individual city departments and points of contact for city-based strategies, people in the community who are involved. We want your ideas. Who ensures the accountability? So, who's like checking the box that yes, you've done this thing that you said you would, or you are revisiting this idea that maybe didn't work out that well. How is that progress being reported and communicated? So back to those indicators we just talked through, once we have sort of a final set of those and, presuming that our office is putting out some sort of annual report, what does that look like? Who does it go to? Are there, is there some like body that we report to that can ask questions that helps us rethink things that aren't working out? Those types of things. How can we increase and streamline interdepartmental communication and collaboration? So, as you all know from our last meeting, the last two meetings, there are going to be a number of other city departments as well as community partners involved in the implementation of this plan. And we want to make sure that we are collaborating in an efficient way to achieve the outcomes we just talked about. And then last question, really a big one, is who owns the plan and what does that mean? So if you have looked at any of the other examples we've been using from other cities, they will often refer to what they call a community-owned plan. What does that mean? Is RVAgreen 2050 a community-owned plan to you? And if not, how can we make it one if that's where we want to go? So again, just a few prompts, and we'll talk through those as a group once we go into our breakout rooms. And then the second question that we'll go over as a group is on the equitable implementation piece. Just want to make sure someone might be unmuted. So check your mics. How would we ensure that equity is being centered in the implementation of the strategies that we've been working so hard on? So this is very much related to the accountability piece. So as you're talking about this in your groups, if there's not a clean line between these two questions, that's totally fine. But this is where we can talk a little bit more about the structure of implementation. So we know that, our office, the Office of Sustainability, has been championing the process to create the RVAgreen 2050 plan. In addition to our office, which will be the main sort of champion in terms of implementation, is there some group that is helping to guide us? For example, the Racial Equity and Environmental Justice Roundtable has been working alongside you guys as working group members and within the working groups as well to help center equity in the process. Does something like that continue on into implementation beyond just this process? Do the working groups play some role in that? We just want all of your ideas. Can we use existing tools like our mapping tool, the Climate Equity Index, or the Equity Screening tool to make sure that equity is being centered in implementation? And how do we delegate power for implementation? So again, these are probably pretty big questions, and we're just going to have an open discussion to get your thoughts on these. We are going to go into breakout rooms again. Kyla, if you want to set those up, they don't have to be the same as last time. Our group only had 2 folks, which was fine. It was a wonderful brain trust of people. But if there's a way to divide up the group so that, it's more even, then we can do that if that works out. This is going to be a sticky note activity, so hopefully you guys liked those when we did them before. We have a couple slides for each of our discussion questions. Kyla, if your group wants to take slides 35 and 37, or I'll just move it. So if y'all want to take 35 and 36 for your discussion, and then my group, we will take 37. I'm trying to move this. 37 and 38. That's how we can focus in our discussion. Same as we've always done, type your ideas in the sticky notes. If you like what someone wrote, drag a star over to it and put any additional thoughts into the slide notes. Kyle and I will also be taking notes along the way, so feel free to just shout out ideas. Any questions on this activity? We're going to be in our breakout rooms till about 12:45.
Just as a heads up, the groups are divided into 4 and 3.
Okay, sounds good.
All right.
Good. Okay, I think we're ready. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you in about half an hour.
I was over here talking and I was on mute and I was like, why is no one responding to me? I was like, what's going on today? I did ask the question of if you all had a preference of jotting your own notes down or if you wanted me or David to jot them down for you.
Combo?
Okay, that works.
Are we on which slide number are we on?
We're on slide 35. We're going to start there. We'll probably spend 15 minutes here and then another 15 minutes on slide 36.
Awesome, thank you.
No problem. So in our last 5 minutes, I'll start talking. All right, I'm gonna break our silence really quickly. I think we have some really great ideas up here. And so I just want to continue the discussion so that we all can expound on these ideas. Let's look at the evaluation of a plan and implementation indicators that could also be utilized to advance accountability in internal and external affairs. I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but is there anything you want to expound on with that, or anything anyone wants to add to? Please remember that if you agree with something, we can add stars next to it as well.
Yeah, thank you. This is Monica. Um, this idea came out of discussion in the roundtable in terms of it's nice to have the plan, and then from the plan, how could we continue to strategize to make sure that goals and objectives of the plan were achieved. And so in addition to outside committees, the thoughts came that those committees would have to have some kind of teeth or something to hold on to for to do their work, and also that there might be some opportunity to advance legislation based on any data that might be accumulated through the plan or the work. So that's just give a little bit of background in terms of how that evaluation came. And though this is a plan, we could also factor in some key evaluation points to move forward with. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Someone placed up here that transparency is what accountability looks like. I 100% agree with that. Just being able to share that, you may not have always hit the mark, but that you're still trying, instead of trying to just make yourself look good. I think that helps. It also assists in building some form of trust between community and us as government. I do see something here about, does anybody else have anything they want to contribute to that, to transparency at all?
I guess one thought there is that like cadence might play into that a little bit, like some sort of, I don't want to set it, but we're going to need interval at which we're updating something, so that like RVA H2O updates everything once a year, and that we look bad for 11 months and then we suddenly look a lot better. So I think that should play in there, or maybe like dates for when there are updates, so that it's easy to tell when something was, or if it's old, or if it's brand new that morning.
All right. We also have periodic public surveys that are embedded within dashboards, whatever mechanism that is going to be sharing our progress. I think that kind of ties into the whole transparency conversation as well. But excuse me, this would help gather sentiments about progress to date and keep people involved and get feedback, and to also make sure that we are on track for our goals. Is there anything anybody would like to add to that? I guess for myself, the question is, how are we getting these surveys into the right communities to get the feedback? I think traditionally we see the same people or same type of people participating in processes. And so ensuring that those surveys are like more representative of what Richmond looks like.
I guess I thought I would have there is, then instead of focusing on the survey, how are we making sure that we're giving progress reports to remain accountable and transparent to those communities. Like, I'd say take the survey with a grain of salt if people don't want to take it, but more making sure that we're reporting out equitably rather than forcing feedback to come through the same way. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah.
I could nix the survey idea, but more, how do we make sure we're not just preaching our progress to the choir?
Right. All right. Someone else said something about online dashboards where the citizens can visit at any time to get data. I did have a question I added here, which, excuse me, was who's going to be responsible? Who's accountable for keeping up with that? And then I also saw that someone else put that like various departments could be in charge of their own data, their own layers to report into. But then I guess the question would be who's holding the various departments accountable for submitting information at a designated time to ensure that that interval reporting.
You know, and based on your comments, I'm thinking in the where my comment, maybe I should modify it to say evaluation of the plan actions versus just the plan, because we're not really talking about the plan, but we're talking about plan follow-up actions or whatever. Yeah, because dashboards are nice and all. They are an internal mechanism, but but if you're really looking for the actions, the end results rather than progress, I think. I mean, progress is nice, but I think citizens are really interested in, you know, what are the outcomes? What are the final outcomes?
I think I'd be curious there, or I might not have a good understanding of all of the strategies at play, but some of them seem like they're going to take an awfully long time. So I'm not sure when, like 2050 seems like a long time to wait to get the end outcome update.
Well, I don't mean 20 till 2015, but what I'm saying is, you know, at year's end, what progress has made? What progress has been made aligned with the plan? So not so you know, versus versus we put out 200 air quality monitors. You know, that's a number, okay, but how much air pollution reduction have we seen that year? So I guess, you know, it's, I guess, what the measurement is. And that's what I'm saying, going back, a measure against the plan in terms of what were the strategies, what were the proposed outcomes, and then what occurred versus
I think with your example, Monica, like the air quality monitors have to go out to have like your initial piece of data to then be able to say like, oh, other actions that we've done in year 2 may have decreased poor air quality or improved the air quality within that time frame from start to finish. So there's going to be moments where the only action is like the starting point. And I do believe that this is something like what we're mapping out isn't all the way to 2050. It's like a portion, and then we revisit in order for us to identify like what adjustments need to be made to reach that actual 2050 goal. But I think with a lot of data points, like starting off, it just has to be the actual collection of the data to then be able to report out like this is the actual change that has occurred. I know there's some other things that were placed up here, but in looking at our time, I'm going to, if you all are okay with it, I'm going to move on to the second question, which is, how would you ensure equity is centered in implementation of the strategies? And I'll give you all 7 to 10 minutes to jot ideas down, and then we can come back and start discussing.
I have a question for the group, if I can interrupt quiet time, because I don't know how to phrase it for like we need something so that things don't get derailed when a loud group that wants something in their neighborhood, or a loud city council person or a new coalition wants or doesn't want something there. Or in a place, or they don't want it in their neighborhood, so they want it in another place.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of it. Could there be something written in the plan that like that states that that I guess the priority, like we have, I guess, a higher priority community, and so I don't know. I'm trying to say it without any, or I guess in a way that wouldn't be offensive to any group. But like just maintaining the priority, or like taking into consideration like the impacts of that action can have on everyone. But I don't know. I don't know. I'm sorry. I just feel like I'm rambling.
No, well, first of all, I asked you on a day you're very tired. Second of all, not easy to say in a PC way at all. So it's sort of like, I'll work on it, but I think it's projects in whatever community they're going to get off the ground, despite, even if like a subsect of the neighborhood doesn't love it. I'll work on it, but yeah. Thank you.
I'm so sorry.
That's an excellent point. So I'm excited about that point. So please push it down there. I'll help you work on that if need to, but I think it's a great point. Converted.
What did you say, Monica?
I said the blank word is diverted. But also, could you explain what you mean by priority neighborhoods?
I'm going for, I can say anything there, but I was going for the places that hopefully the roundtable or the equity index or the indicators are in, like wherever the project, like according to whatever metrics should happen,
Mm-hmm.
can't get derailed by people who are like a small subgroup of people who are like not in my backyard.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I figured out our word, people. It's NIMBY, but I don't know how to say it nicely. Is there,
Mm-hmm.
Monica, you just let me know how I should change this because I know it's not quite right yet.
Yeah, I'm looking to assist. Like you said, it takes a bit of wordsmithing, but I understand the point. I'm trying to help. Um, I would just say don't call it priority neighborhoods. I would call it
Maybe we can even get rid of it entirely and I don't have to stick my foot in my mouth.
so it's not that big of an event. Well, I don't think actually, I think I don't, yeah, you will have, in an equity lens, right? We still have to be mindful of what the community wants, although it may be good for them, they may not want it.
Yeah, so I guess I'm thinking of small subgroups. We can all, and maybe this doesn't belong here, but I'm thinking about like any stream restoration we ever try to make place, like, or take place, it would be a benefit to the community. Part of the community wants it. And then they get like some national groups and people from outside the community to chime in and the project's done. Like it's not going to happen. And I'm worried about that happening with, we want to a
Right,
forest.
so maybe say, just say, community-driven projects. Um, support community-driven projects. Who prioritize equity projects. Yeah, I know that's a difficult one. Yeah, I think you got it.
Okay, it doesn't have, happily, it's not set in stone, but is that,
Yeah, that gets to the point, I think.
and covers our basis for what we want versus when
Mm-hmm.
I decide I don't want it somewhere else.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. I think we are all back now. So I know, at least for our group, these are tough questions. These are big questions. Any final thoughts from that activity that were cut off, or anything that anybody wants to share before we move on to wrap up? And if not, I will go ahead and share my screen again. Thank you all so much for all of your thoughts. Please continue adding them if you have any. This is not the last time you'll see any of this. We'll be coming back to you with all of this information once we get it organized. The other working groups are going to be looking at this week as well. So, in terms of what's next, so here's our new graphic that shows, what we've been doing over the last few meetings, what we did today, talking about accountability and transparency. And over the next several months, we are going to be working internally as well as with you all and all of the rest of our stakeholders to pull all of this content together. We've produced so much with you all over the last almost a year now, and we want to make sure that we are documenting not only that process, but capturing all of these ideas and turning it into something that is useful and relevant to the community. So that's a big task, and we need your help. I'm going to be talking a little bit more about that in a second, but just wanted to say that in terms of the next time you'll be hearing from us will probably be towards our next meeting, which will be in November. In the meantime, of course, we might be reaching out to you all for specific questions, tasks, things like that. If you all think of anything, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. But our specific ask for you now is to do this quick survey in the time that we have left. We're just going to leave kind of the room open in case y'all have questions. This is like a volunteer survey, community capacity survey. You may have seen this in a previous form. So just be aware that we're kind of repurposing a survey that was already out there. This is a few different sections. We're asking you all to let us know if you have any capacity to help us over the next, really several months through the spring with things like community engagement, but then also specific tasks for what I'm calling plan development. So we are, as you all know, doing this whole thing sort of in-house. We don't have a consultant group or anything that's guiding like the overall process and pulling together like a fancy PDF or something at the end. So if you have skills, knowledge, abilities, just ideas that you want to contribute to this, we would love to hear about that. So there's a section in that survey that lists a couple things like, do you dabble in graphic design? Do you speak another language? It's a ton of stuff that we want to know, if you'd be willing to lend your support on. So take a few minutes to do that as we're wrapping up. In general, though, we are all done with today's meeting. So we also want to leave room for any updates from you all, any upcoming events that we can share with the community. We do have our newsletter going out, I believe, at the end of this week or early next week. So would love to hear about any events and things coming up we can share. Yeah, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Thank you, David, I think, for putting the link to the survey in the chat, and I will open the room to you all now.
Is that an internal survey, or is it helpful for us to share that on social media?
Good question. I think it's, not really designed to share that broadly without the context that we've been working in, but if you think if you know folks who you think would be interested in helping, please feel free to share. We actually hadn't even discussed whether we want to put it out on social media, but depending on how this goes with the working groups, we might be doing that. So, and we will ask you all to help us do that too. So good idea, Shelley. Thanks. Any other questions, updates, anything exciting? If not, I have a very bad joke that I am really looking forward to telling you all.
I'm ready.
I'm already laughing.
Let's just go.
Okay, ready? So have y'all heard the story about how Worcestershire sauce got its name? What happened was a long time ago, Cowboy walks into a bar and they give him a sauce with his fries and he goes, "Hey, Worcestershire sauce." I couldn't help it. I heard that yesterday. I was like, I'm telling the working group this. Please feel free to share. All right, so we're all done. Stick around if you want. We have a couple extra minutes, ask questions, fill out the survey, but otherwise you are free to go. And thank you all so much for all of your hard work over the summer. And we'll look forward to reconvening as a group this fall. Bye, everyone.
Bye, thank you.
Take care. Thank you.
Thanks, Monica.